Cindy Vitrick asked us to cover this next story, so shout out to her for commenting below, and that's likely the last smile you're going to see me have on this story, so I deeply apologize. On September 22nd, a 16-year-old boy named Channing Smith was outed by his classmates online when both of his, quote, friends shared compromising text messages through screenshots, revealing explicit text messages between Smith and another boy. Channing Smith wasn't out of the closet yet to anyone in his class or his family, and later that day his body was discovered at his home after Channing took his own life. And unbelievably, that's not even the tip of the iceberg of how horrible this story gets. Coffee County District Attorney Craig Northcott told press he hasn't decided on whether to charge these friends of his who outed Channing online with harassment or manslaughter yet, but he did tell the family that he does not intend to move forward with prosecution of any kind. And again, that still isn't the f***ed up part of the story. And at this point, you might assume the worst part of this story is the fact that if you scroll down on the one article we were talking about here, even though there's multiple news outlets that are covering this, the very next related article which they recommend to you is about a 15-year-old who committed suicide in April in Huntsville, Alabama. But you'd be wrong again because Channing Smith's story only brought to the national spotlight a 2018 video where District Attorney Craig Northcott said that he refuses to enforce Tennessee's domestic violence laws in cases of intimate partner violence between same-sex spouses because he, quote, doesn't recognize it as marriage. He is also quoted stating that the reason that there's enhanced punishment on domestic violence is to recognize and protect the sanctity of marriage, but with same-sex couples, there's no marriage to protect. And where do I begin with this one? First off, domestic violence charges are to protect everyone and anyone from an abusive relationship of any kind. Second, I have literally been in an abusive relationship with one of my ex-boyfriends who used to slap me across the face for trying to kiss him, would call me ugly in replace of I love yous, and push me to the asphalt on the ground for trying to hug him. But I sadly know I was lucky to get out of that relationship, and I was lucky it wasn't worse, like many other relationships in this country. So don't give me or anyone else this bullcrap that you won't charge someone for a crime because same-sex relationships aren't real. We exist whether you like it or not, so do your job, follow the law, which is the entire job description that you have, or resign from your position immediately and let someone else do your job for you. Channing Smith deserves justice. A 16-year-old committed suicide, and Northcott wants to not bring charges because he was gay. I'm sorry, but if that's acceptable to the city of Manchester, Tennessee, then our country has fallen, and our liberty and justice for all has ended right here. And I'm sorry for getting emotional, and I try to keep the show family-friendly as much as possible, but this story demands it. To Channing Smith in heaven right now, I am so sorry our country let you down. To his surviving family, I am so sorry you'll never see him again. But to DA Craig Northcott, I think we can all agree here. F*** you if you don't do your job. And there is so much left to this story that is just breaking now that we didn't have time to script out, so it's absolutely ridiculous the deeper we dive into this story and the more that breaks on this story, so it only gets worse from here, folks. And so today, as we're preparing to record the episode for mid-October, all of a sudden more news breaks. And so we have now stuff from the school district that Channing went to. And so that's even more up of what they've done. And I'm sorry for the horrible language. I try to keep this family friendly, but this story is... I hope you guys can agree that it's this bad that I don't want to control my language too much on it. I want to scream at this district attorney. I want to scream at the school district for not doing anything. I want to scream at someone. And, yeah, it's just one of those stories. So I hope you can understand that. This is an article that was just put out today from out.com, which some might say has a LGBTQ bias, but again, they're credible, and this is backed up by another news agency already that is completely out of the LGBTQ rights initiative. So basically they interviewed Joshua, who is the, I believe, older brother of Channing. And so Joshua comes on camera and did a couple things for BBC, USA Today, and New York Times. Joshua spoke to CNN on the nightly news and stuff like that on their broadcast with a t-shirt that read Justice for Channing, with the hashtag Justice for Channing. He's been in the media recently for this, and ever since. As Joshua quotes here, quote, "There's a moment in time where there's a window of opportunity," he explains. "In a week or two, everyone's back to the groove of their daily life. I'm going to have to just press the pause button on resting and grieving. Until I see justice brought, I'm not going to quit," which is fantastic words to hear. But unfortunately, I think he's right in this. I can only imagine what it is that their family is going through right now. And to have to go through that in the public eye and also fight for your son and your brother's right to justice and the perpetrators to have their day in court, I think that is just despicable that the system is allowing that to happen and forcing them to go through that. In this article, he says that night when his father spoke to his son for the last time, they didn't fight or quarrel. Channing just scratched the head of his family dog, said goodnight, and went upstairs. Now, hours later, his father told him that he discovered Channing's body. He had shot himself. And he says, although the 16-year-old privately identified as bisexual, confiding in a couple friends at school, Joshua says it would have been a struggle for his brother to be out in a stereotypical southern town. Not even his family knew. And the next, really messed up part of this story is that after the news broke of Channing taking his own life, the school really missed their mark here as well, and they did some really shady stuff as well. According to Joshua, I'm just going to read the article because they say it a lot better than I'm going to be able to word it here. I'm sorry. But according to Joshua, even Channing's high school has yet to respond meaningfully to his death. After news broke of his brother had taken his own life, Joshua claims administrators at Coffee County Central High School didn't call an assembly to address the incident or provide support for students who were affected. He points out that the school still doesn't have a statement on its website acknowledging Channing's passing. Quote, "They did send an email to parents saying that counselors would be available if any kids needed it," Joshua says, but they didn't really have any direct communication with the kids themselves. And that's bad enough on its own for a school to not even acknowledge this happening. And the really messed up part is, you have an entire school now that is trying to grieve in whatever way they can over their classmate who just committed suicide. And not only do you have the family and the close friends who are trying to grieve in whatever way they can and having to put their lives on pause and their grief on pause just so they can get justice for their loved one, you have an entire school that's pretty much doing the same and trying to figure out how to grieve. Because remember, his school classmates were 14 through 18-year-old kids, and they're trying to understand, how do we grieve over this? This is not something you're supposed to know how to do at 14 through 18 years old, And so they're trying to understand, how do we grieve? And they're doing it in the only way they know how. And so they created hashtag Justice for Channing signs in their art class the next day. And they saw Channing's brother Joshua on CNN and with his t-shirt reading hashtag Justice for Channing, and then they went ahead and they took that hashtag and made signs about it, and they were trying to demand justice for their friend as well. And that was so beautiful. But then the principal of their high school decided, rather than letting their kids grieve in whatever way they want to right now. He decided it was important, or she decided it was important enough to stop them from doing that, that the principal actually confiscated all of those signs and said it won't be allowed anymore in their school to have Justice for Channing signs. And so the next day, the students made homemade t-shirts. And they had Justice for Channing t-shirts on when they went to school the next day, with that same slogan. And it's like, how could you tell students, no, you're not allowed to grieve. You're not allowed to show any love for your classmate who has no justice right now. It was so offensive, not only what the DA is doing, but what the principal is doing. And so now it becomes a question of, should the district attorney step down from his position? Should the principal step down from their position? Or is the superintendent of that school district or the governor or whoever going to demand that principal be taken out of office because of their actions here and not letting their students grieve at all? And as Joshua quotes here, after an hour or two after the interview went live on CNN, Joshua said that the school, quote, finally put something on its Facebook page, a graphic that shows the hotline and website for suicide prevention, but that's still not specific about Channing, and they're still not acknowledging Channing's death and suicide. They're just saying, here's the number of the suicide prevention hotline, call it if you need, which is absolutely ridiculous. And the school's Facebook page had over 100 replies on that, and the school, I guess, is refusing to acknowledge it, and they're refusing to comment on any of those replies. And even Joshua says at the very end of this story that he doesn't want Channing's life to be defined by tragedy. He remembers his sibling as, quote, kind and caring, calling him, quote, the kind of kid that would listen to everyone else's problems. Really, I just learned this. I always knew he had a good heart, but immediately after his death, other kids had said that they'd had issues with suicide and they would go to Channing. He was the one they would talk to them and help them through their problems. As strange as it is, it ended up being him in the end. So unfortunately, this story has blown up to much more than just Channing. It can't just be a story about a 16-year-old boy who took his own life out of fear of being out to the world and that world not accepting him because of where he lived in the country. It's so sad. That's the option that kids a lot of times go to, is that, you know, rather than being out, they choose to be out of this life. And that's something where we have to support the Trevor Project, and that's why this entire video is going to be, there's links all around the video to support Trevor Project and everything they do, because they help kids in these very specific situations at their what could be their final moments. And I think we need to support them today. I hope that people donate. I hope you guys donate to the Trevor Project. It's important to donate to them, not just now, but every day of the year. It's important, but especially now. And really, again, it's sad. It can't just be about him. Now this story is about the district attorney whose homophobic beliefs mean that he doesn't do his job and charge people with actual crimes. It's now no longer about Channing. It's about these two other boys and friends that won't get charged with manslaughter because the district attorney says, oh, well, it's okay if it was gay, right? It can't be about that. I mean, we have to charge actual criminals with crimes here. I don't think we're going to see him resign anytime soon, unfortunately. I really hope so. I'm calling for it. I want him to resign because this is not doing his job. If he charges them with manslaughter and lets those kids have a day in court, charged as adults, by the way, because they are 16 as well, from what I've heard, then that is letting the process handle these kids. By the way, it doesn't mean that they're going to be convicted of these crimes. I think just bringing them into court and saying they deserve their day in court for what they've done. And the court needs to prove that they did these things, but there is ample evidence they did, so I think it's fairly straightforward, and I think they'll be easily convicted if they're brought on these charges, but I think he needs to do his job or he needs to resign. So the entire family of Channing, our hearts, our prayers are with you, and we're so sorry this happened. Yeah. And it's one of those days where you just make sure your kids know that you love them. Make sure that your students know that you love them, and make sure that you hug your friends at school, and not just your friends. I mean, make sure that every classmate knows that their life is worth living. I think this happens far too often in our country. We talk about mass shootings all the time, but suicide happens far too often in our country to not have schools do anything about it. I think our school system needs to do a better job of teaching kids, if this is the way you're feeling, call me. Or here's a prevention hotline to call and help you with that situation. And I'm terribly, terribly sorry to Channing's family that the school system let him down here. And that those friends, even if you want to call them friends, did that to him and forced him to commit suicide. So, unfortunately, that is how we're ending this story. Make sure the people in your life know that you love them. If you have any thoughts on any of the stories we shared, have any questions or stories you think we missed this past month, please do leave those in the comments down below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our network for plenty more great gay content to come in the future, and share this video with others. I'm Matt Haslam, this has been PPR, and have a gay day, everyone. Bye for now.